In American society, money is a taboo topic. We're taught at a young age it's improper to talk about it, but we're also bombarded with messages about the power and importance of money in our everyday lives. And by not talking about it, we miss out on the skills and lessons we need to effectively understand and financially plan. That changes today. Welcome to Money Tales. Hosted by Sandy Brager and Cami Doder, Money Tales brings more than 35 years of combined professional experience in personal finance to demystify money and demonstrate what it's like to speak openly about personal financial matters. Join us each episode as they interview modern-day movers and shakers about how money decisions intertwine with their daily lives in order to give you better insight into productive financial conversations. Subscribe today and register for our blog Fathom at aspiriant.com/podcasts to increase your money mojo. And now, here's Cami and Sandy.
Anne Bauer, today's Money Tales guest, once believed she was quote-unquote bad with money because she struggled with math. Now, as CEO of her family business, she proves just how sharp she is with both money and numbers. For her, money is energy.
Here are 3 key money topics Anne hits on in this conversation. First, money flows like energy in an infinity loop between giving and receiving. An imbalance in either direction creates problems. Second, generational financial trauma can create protective patterns that later limit business growth if not addressed. And third, working with your spouse requires clear boundary setting between home and office, especially when it comes to financial responsibilities. Now it's our pleasure to bring you Anne Bauer's Money Tales.
Welcome to the Money Tales podcast. I'm Cami Doder.
And I'm Sandy Brager. We are joined today by our special guest, Anne Bauer. Welcome to Money Tales, Anne.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
We are glad to have you. I wanted to chat briefly before we get to your Money Tales about something that occurred to me that might help our listeners and might help each other. And that is the importance of being vigilant consumers. And what I mean by vigilant consumers, that whole old adage of before you pay for something, take a look at the bill closely. In our current world of automated payments and being able to just tap your card down, it's really easy to go quick and not pay attention. There are 2 recent reasons in my family's life why I'm bringing this up, because it occurred to me if we're not more diligent in our own consumption and how we're reviewing our payments, we're going to be spending a lot more money than we ever expected. So first situation, my husband was at a store. He bought 3 of a pretty small priced item. I think it was like $3 each. He gets through the grocery line. There's other groceries in the bag. He pays and he walks out and he's like, wait a second, that total seems really high. Usually when I buy this amount, it's like $50. Why is it $150? And so he took a second and he looked at the receipt and he realized that the checker had punched in 33 of the $3 items instead of 3.
Oh, geez, that adds up.
So he went back to the manager and had to take some time to get that all resolved.
So real quick, Sandy, he asked for the receipt. Because that's the other thing.
Good point. Yeah, he must have, because else he wouldn't have known. But it didn't occur to him when the cashier told him the total or he looked at the total, whatever. He just paid. And then it was walking out and he did have the receipt. So good point on that one, Cami. The other recent spending mishap, I'll call it, occurred when I looked at a receipt after I made payment online to order pizzas. We were out and about. We wanted to pick up some pizzas at the local pizza shop on our way home. I did the online order. And it wasn't until later that I realized they put a 20% tip in on the order and I was doing the pickup. Like it wasn't even a delivery. It adds up. So I just thought really important, very basic concept, but something that many of us, or at least in my family, I'm admitting, we don't take the time to pay attention.
It's that, Sandy. It's that everything's so fast. The assumption that now we're using barcodes. When I was a kid, the checker plugged in.
Oh, that's right.
Some sort of price, right?
They had to actually manually, yeah.
So I really was feeling your stories thinking, oh, I assume since there's a barcode, nothing can go wrong. So I really appreciate the reminder. I also think there's something funny when your bill comes. I'm thinking about at a restaurant and checking the restaurant bill. I don't want to send a message that I don't trust them.
Oh,
But I don't think that's the right thing. You're just checking. We're in this together, team. I got to change my mindset. Like, I am not second guessing you. I'm just making sure mistakes happen. And let me just review. You might have missed something that I did consume.
good
So,
point.
yeah, there we go. Wow. This really triggered something in me.
Well, sometimes the best financial tips are some of the basics. So,
That's true, Sandy. It's my pleasure to formally introduce Anne Bauer. It's great to have you on Money Tales. And would you start us off by introducing yourself and sharing a couple pivotal moments that have taken place in your life that really influenced who you are?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Anne Bauer. I am a sixth generation family business owner. My family's business started out as a supply outpost where the Oregon and Santa Fe trails cross through Kansas City. And the company was incorporated in 1891, although it probably operated before then. And we, out of basically a covered wagon, supplied pots and pans and dry goods to travelers heading west. Then over the years, each generation, the business has changed and evolved. So it became a general store around Kansas City. They started supplying restaurants around the Kansas City area, in addition to having the retail locations. And then when my grandfather was running the company, it was sort of the rise of the commercial airline industry boom. And back then, of course, flying on an airplane was an event. Like everyone got dressed up, you got a meal on the plane. And back then, TWA was headquartered in Kansas City. They were at the old municipal airport, which, if you're familiar with Kansas City, is actually right across from another historical area of Kansas City, which is the Kansas City Stockyards. Back then, the airplanes didn't have air conditioning. And when the planes would land and sit on the tarmac, they'd open all the doors to get fresh air in the airplane. But because of the location across from the stockyards, flies would get in. It was not a super pleasant experience for the passengers. And so TWA came to my grandfather and said, "Hey, can we start buying fly swatters from you all?" And that was our really glamorous entry into the airline industry.
oh my
But
gosh.
Amazing.
that business from those fly swatters grew, and eventually our company was supplying everything that TWA used in first class. So bone china, lead crystal, beautiful linens. And from there, the airline supply business just grew. So when my dad took over, he closed down all the retail locations. He was kind of reading the temperature of the economy and going, I think the future of mom and pop retail is limited. And so we're going to go all in on the airline business. He closed those retail locations and we started supplying airlines all over the world. And now we are still supplying travelers, but just a really different technology than covered wagons back in 1891. So,
What a story, Anne.
yeah. I took over as president and CEO about 12 years ago when my dad was ready to retire. I had not grown up planning on taking over the family business. I started working for the family business after college because my dad asked me to. And I was a really good firstborn daughter who was like, yeah, I'll do whatever you want. Plus, he offered to send me to Europe for a couple of years to open a European sales office. So, like, the carrot was very tempting. So I was like, that sounds great. I did that and then came back and continued working for the family business. And then we reached a point where my dad was ready to retire. Our family also has a cattle ranch, and my brother was really honest and was like, if I never have to sit in an office for the rest of my life and I can be out in the pastures and wearing jeans and dirty boots, that is what I would really love my life to be. And I was like, well, that's great because that sounds terrible to me. I'll take the airline business. I took over about 12 years ago. And in that process, realized for the first couple of years, I tried to do everything exactly like my dad did, which I think is a really common experience for rising gen in family business. Like, it's been working. I don't want to rock the boat. I want everything to stay consistent. But I also reached a point after a couple of years, while the company was doing well, I was really struggling because I was squeezing myself into this little dad suit every day, trying to be exactly the leader that I had seen him be. And we're very different people. And I realized that it was not feeling authentic. It felt like I was playing a part every day instead of actually being my own authentic self. And so I began a path of self-exploration to kind of figure out who I was as a leader within this framework that I'd been gifted, and still wanting to honor the legacy and the history of our family business, but also find my own unique path forward within it. On that path, I became a certified coach, not planning on coaching anyone, but just to coach myself in that process. But then in 2020, the airline stopped flying and I suddenly had a lot of time on my hands. And I remember being at home and going, what are we going to do? And I reached into my tool bag that I'd acquired during my coaching certification and really started using all those tools to support myself during that time. And I looked around and realized that there were lots of other people in the same boat struggling. And so I started coaching some folks on the side.
Other family business leaders.
Yeah, exactly. To begin with, it was really anybody that I met who was interested. But I realized quickly that my very favorite clients were folks who grew up in family businesses or worked with their spouse. My husband also works in the airline business with me. So we've worked together for over a decade now. So I've got a lot of experience with the good and the bad and the ugly with that dynamic as well. I ended up starting a coaching business. And then as the airline business came back up, I realized that I needed to put in some structures to be able to handle both of these things as the coaching business really grew organically. And the other piece that came in during that process was I also started doing a lot of energy work with my clients. So that was, again, something that I had a lot of experience with, working with an energy healer as I took over our family business. And there was a lot of patterns in ancestral healing that was coming up for me that I needed support around. Like, I'm feeling this way and I'm doing all the right things and I don't understand why I'm still feeling so much pressure. And it turned out that was a lot of ancestral energy that needed to be seen and addressed and resolved, which could be an entire podcast unto itself. But that started coming in as I was working with my clients. I went into an intensive 3-year apprenticeship to learn energy healing so that I could work with that modality as well with my clients in a really supportive way. And so that is like an additional thread that's sort of woven into my work. So I've got this trifecta of coaching, a ton of lived experience and energy work that weave together in the work that I do with my clients now. So
there are so many questions that bubble up. I mean, this is going to be an incredible conversation. Let's start, though, with who taught you when you were growing up the most about money? And then how did that happen? How did you learn?
There's a couple of things. Like, there weren't money lessons happening in my family. I think this is not a unique experience to me, but I struggled with math. I think I also grew up in the generation where there was a lot of belief that girls just weren't as good at math. A lot of the conversations that I specifically had about learning about money was around my actual poor addition and subtraction skills. So like, it was really something that was hard for me. Numbers still in my brain are challenging for me. I really have to be diligent as I'm going through like spreadsheets and things like that. I'm also blessed to have my husband who is such a numbers guy, and he also supports me in that. But that was a challenge for me. I always had this understanding growing up. I couldn't be very good at money because I wasn't very good at math. There was that feeling that I almost brought in from schooling and things like that. And then at home, what I learned that I really saw demonstrated, and I think this is really common for folks who grow up in family businesses, is money comes from working hard, and you need to be working hard. You need to make sure everybody sees you're working hard, and your value is linked to that. Like, that is what we do here. We're talking about business. We're doing this thing all the time. So those two pieces were my sort of background or my understanding that came together was, well, I need to work really hard to make money, but then also I don't know that I'm going to be very good at tracking it myself. The two big messages that I had growing up personally.
With those two messages and also your later insight about family energy overhang, what was happening for you when your dad asked you to join the business after college? You said yes because you were a dutiful oldest child. What was happening in your mind and how were you orienting yourself to the work?
It was interesting because a couple of things happened. First, the very first conversation that my dad had with anyone saying, I think Anne should take over the family business, wasn't even with me. It was actually with my husband, because I think he knew that I would say, I don't think I can do this. And so he talked to Brandon and said, I think Anne should take over the business. I think you should come on as the EVP and help her, be her numbers guy, handle the things that she feels wobbly about, and let her build the business, because I was the relationships person. He knew I had that down. He saw that my husband could fill this piece that I felt wobbly around. And so talked to Brandon first and kind of sold the idea to Brandon. And then Brandon came to me and goes, so I had a conversation with your dad. And what do you think about this?
That's so interesting.
It was this combination of, I think Anne should take over, and I think Brandon would be the perfect person to come in and help support you on the financial side.
That sounds like a huge conversation.
Yeah, it was. It was a huge conversation.
How did it land on you initially?
Initially, it was a little overwhelming and terrifying. Like, can I really do this? But at that point, my husband and I had been married for about 12 years. So we were solid. Like, I knew his strengths. I had a lot of faith in him. And even though I had never considered it until my dad mentioned it, like the minute he said, I think Brandon should come on board and be your detail guy, I was like, oh, yeah, you are exactly right. That is a good call. It was almost like if I had thought about it as just me, I think I would have been like, no, 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 no. But when I thought about it as like an us, then it felt much more doable.
Incredible. Okay, so I got to ask the question though. Working with your husband, that's pretty hard to do.
Yeah.
How'd you make that work? Because you've got a big smile on your face. Having him involved from the very beginning was a closing for you, like helped you say yes. But then tell us about what it's like to work with your husband, and then you have to come home and work at home together.
Yeah, 100%. There was a learning curve. Like, it turns out, apparently I have like a work voice that I did not realize I had. It was a learning curve. And we had to have a lot of intentional conversations, and still do, around systems and agreements, not only in the company, but as a couple. Things like, just because I make the meals at home doesn't mean that I'm going to pick up your dishes at lunch at the office. Things like that. And just realizing this is something that is really natural in a pattern for us at home, but actually at the office, it doesn't work.
What great advice.
It doesn't make it wrong or anything like that. It's just, we need to actually switch how we interact around certain things or patterns when we're at the office versus when we're home. And then also having really clear boundaries, or being in communication about what we're wanting in any given moment. Like, we try to be really intentional when we're at home, especially to say, I've got a couple of office things that I actually need to ask you about right now. Are you available for that? Because at the office, yes, obviously we're available, but say we get home and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I forgot to ask about this. I could write it on a Post-it note and wait until the next day during work hours, but sometimes it just makes sense to talk about it over coffee in the morning. And we like that, but we like to be clear about it instead of feeling like we're always talking about work, and to really be intentional about when it's time for us to just hang out in the backyard and talk about nothing versus really talking about something that's related to the company.
And did you have practice around those types of boundaries and communications growing up with a family business lineage?
That was actually something that, in a lot of ways, I worked to change a little bit in my tenure as a leader. Growing up in a family business, my family talked about business all the time. Part of it, I think, is also my dad, bless him, is like from the generation, he probably has undiagnosed and untreated ADHD. So it made him an amazing entrepreneur, but also hyper focused. When he's thinking about something, it's all he can think about, all he can talk about. There were a lot of times where we were at the dinner table and it was like we were just watching a board meeting between him and my mom, and the kids are just like, do, 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 you know. That was fine because there were three of us siblings, but my family now, it's me and Brandon, and we just have one daughter. And I was like, I want Lily to feel a part of this trio. I don't want her to feel like she's on the outside looking in as we're talking constantly about work. Between that and Brandon not growing up in a family business, so he grew up in sort of a more traditional where his mom and dad both went to work and they came home and they didn't really want to talk about work at the end of the day. Between Brandon having that modeled and me being intentional about wanting to have it be different for my daughter, we just got really intentional about that. I also studied psychology as an undergraduate, which I always laugh that now in hindsight, I'm like, I probably did because I grew up in a family business.
So important.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
There was like a certain amount of education that I also got that then I realized, oh, this is actually really helpful.
I grew up in a family business, so my generation would be third generation. And
Okay.
would you describe something that I know is really hard, but describe the culture of your family that encourages generational reinvention of the business? There was a total reinvention. I loved how you said you tried to be your dad and you realized this doesn't work. It's really hard for the leader generation to allow the next gen to do different things, to make mistakes or try new things. But it sounds like it's culturally embedded in your family from the story you told. Tell us more about that.
It is in some ways, but then we're also humans too. So when my dad took over and decided to close down the retail locations, even though my grandfather had been the one who had entered into the airline supply business, it was really hard for my grandpa to see. Like, he would come into our office and he still called it going to the store, even though it hadn't been a store for 15 years. But for him, actually deciding to not do retail anymore was really hard for him. And during that transition period, there were some rifts where at one point my grandpa was kind of like, all right, whatever, good luck, kid. My mom said she just kept being like, you're going back in there again, shoving my dad back in the room and being like, we're going to figure this out. There's definitely places where it's really hard. I also see that in our family's cattle ranch. My dad and mom live on the ranch with my brother and sister-in-law and their kids. So their houses are literally a quarter of a mile down the driveway from one another. And this is really common in ag families, but it's an extra challenge because your business is also your home. When my brother wants to change something, there's a little bit of like well, we've always done it this, what? And so there's a lot of process and finesse in that they're still navigating as well.
It's hard. It's when you tell the story, it just sounds so easy. We close down the store. It's hard. Emotions get involved. Sounds like there was a lot of conversation to be had.
Yeah.
And it's incredible. Kudos to you all for navigating that.
Persistence. Yeah. Talk to us about the energy of money.
Yeah. I'm not going to lie. When you were like, do you want to come on our Money Tales podcast? And my first thought was, oh God, no, like I can't talk about money. But again, that's the numbers part. But then when I stop and think, because the energy of money I get, that's a totally different thing. I understand that my brain struggles with the numbers part, but The minute that I started understanding and relating to money energetically, I no longer feel like I'm quote unquote bad with money. It's just a different way of understanding it, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, tell us more. This is fascinating.
One of the main things that I have come to understand is that money is a flow of energy, just like anything else. It's a relational entity. As a business, if you think about what you're offering in the world, the flow of money and services or products, it needs to look like an infinity sign. You're giving something and then you're receiving something in reciprocity, and then you're giving something and you're receiving something in reciprocity. And the places where we get in trouble is when one side of that infinity symbol is out of balance with the other side. I see this a lot in very well-intentioned business owners who are like, I just want to give. And I was one of these. I just want to be clear. Some of the biggest fights I had with my dad where he was like, we are not a nonprofit. We cannot give the customers what they're asking here. We would make no money, And I was like, but that's what they want. But I've come to really understand it's not of service to anyone to be lopsided one way or the other. It needs to actually be a balanced system. And that applies everywhere in business and relationships and everywhere.
What are some of the signs when you're out of balance? Obviously, running out of money is a clear sign.
Yeah, right.
But stepping back from the extremes, what can people look for?
Yeah, it's almost easier to think about it relationally. If a relationship is out of balance, you're either feeling drained and burned out, or you're feeling anxious or maybe depressed, like things like that. The same applies in a financial relationship as well. I actually see in a lot of places just out in the world where the financial balance has actually gotten a little bit too much receiving and not paying enough attention to where the financiers are going out. And that was actually something that I have worked to change in our own family business, because there were some different points during the generations, and this is where the ancestral part comes in, is there were some points of real financial trauma that happened in the family business. One of them, for my dad, thinking more recently, there are instances that go even as far back as the second and third generation. But with my dad, during September 11th, all of the airlines shut down. It was very similar to the pandemic. Airlines in the US stopped flying. And this was the first time that we had seen something like this happen. All of the banks were also terrified of what was going to happen. So our customers stopped buying everything, and we had operating loans because during that time, some of our contracts were huge. So we needed to borrow money to be able to bring in enough inventory to turn around and ship things out. All of our banks saw what was happening and freaked out and recalled our loans, which was terrifying for my dad. Think about the scale of that. He, after that, was basically like, I never want to have to borrow money from somebody again. So he started an effort of pulling all of our financial resources in, which is fine to an extent. But when I came in, I realized that there was a little bit of an energy of paranoia is probably too strong of a word, but like suspicion. When it comes to trying to make new connections and move into new relationships and industries and things like that, having that I don't trust anybody with anything feeling is a hard way to navigate financially. I started working to undo that, knowing this served us well for this little period of time, but it's time to relax the purse strings a little bit. Like, we're okay, it's okay, everything's okay, and started to work to rebalance that a little bit.
It sounds incredibly difficult because you're doing that with your father.
Yeah, again, it's a persistence. I talk with my clients about this all the time, like understanding nothing's going to be a single conversation and done. And even the reaction to a first conversation doesn't mean that that's the final reaction. That's something that I talk to my clients about all the time. Like, we're going to try this. And then if it doesn't go well, that's okay. We're going to try again. And we're going to try again. And we're going to try again. Because even though sometimes it feels like, oh, we're still talking about this, things are slowly shifting.
Well said.
Great reminder for all money conversations and energy conversations. Tell us, what's your next money conversation going to be and who's it going to be with?
This may be kind of a weird response, but we are in a position right now with our business where some things have shifted and opened up. It looks like we're actually going to be making a lot more money this year than we originally projected, which is a wonderful thing to happen. I need to actually spend time with the energy of the business and say, where do you want this money to go? What do we do with it? How do you want to be resourced? And where do we need to direct this energy now in order to really move forward in the most aligned way? And then also having conversations with our accountant and, my husband and my dad, all the logistical conversations too, but that conversation with the energy of my business and what it actually wants for this next season feels really important for the season that we're moving into next.
Incredible. I really appreciate you starting the conversation talking about feeling not so confident in math. There's a lot of listeners who might feel the same way because all I heard was this woman who's completely financially astute, really connected and understands money. It's so wonderful to have heard your whole story. Would you share the best place for listeners to find you digitally?
My website is thelegacyevolution.com. I'm also Anne Bauer _KC on Instagram and LinkedIn as well. I've got a ton of free resources on my website. There's a blog. I also have a podcast talking about family business dynamics. Yeah.
And thank you for joining us on Money Tales. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Money Tales podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, share it with someone you think would benefit from listening. And leave us a review on your favorite podcasting platform. Your ratings and reviews help more people find our podcast. If you're inspired to gain clarity and peace of mind about financial matters, don't hesitate to reach out to our team at Aspiriant. Go to aspiriant.com/start a dialogue. Or you can email Sandy and me at podcasts@aspiriant.com. See you next time.